Hi everyone, welcome to this session. So this is going to be around about the modern deployment approach. So I'm Steve Beaumont, Product Development Director at PowerON Platforms. So I'm definitely the techie of the bunch, as you probably have seen from some of the sessions we've been doing around the demos and bits and pieces. And I'm also a Microsoft MVP within the System Center Cloud and Data Center arena. So working specifically with some of the Microsoft management technologies and the Azure bits and pieces that come in around hybrid cloud and the infrastructure as a service and some of the log analytics side. So modern desktop deployment approach. So today I'm going to be talking a little bit around where we've been, where we're going to, and some of the new things that are changing the ways that we can approach how we configure both the desktops, how we manage the desktops, and how we can actually look at doing configuration of them devices. So in the past it's always been a case of manual builds. We used to go run around, grab some USB keys, maybe put a CD into a system, do some configuration of that, do some installs, and we built a system for a user. The next thing that we started to do is this idea of actually looking around things like batch files. How can we actually programmatically decide that actually I want this configuration to be applied, I need this thing to do or this script installer to run. And we started to develop a way of being able to do some of that stuff. And then as languages evolved, we started to look at things like VB scripts, making sure that we actually do better error checking, trying to do more complex tasks, until we got to the stage of PowerShell, which became much more powerful, much more useful. The ability to remote onto systems, execute processes, set registry keys, items, do lots of complex tasks. Now we have something else. We have Azure automation. So Microsoft brought in this concept around how do we manage things like the data centers, how do we do scaled deployments, how can we actually do large tasks in a structured and a scheduled manner. So Azure automation took the learnings of some of the stuff that we had on premise and actually wrapped it up into a cloud service. So Azure automation, it is something that can be used to automate stuff regardless of where they live. So it doesn't matter whether they are up in Azure. The name Azure Automation doesn't necessarily mean it's just for automating Azure. It's for automating anything that we can reach to. This could be on-premise infrastructure. So we have a process that we're known as a hybrid worker. So we can actually go and communicate to an on-premise server and then do anything with your on-premise infrastructure. Or it could be something that's in Azure and we're doing the task in there and we're scaling out things like resource templates. Or it could be something even in another cloud provider, where we use that same concept as if it was on your local on-premise infrastructure, and we're again interacting with that hybrid worker and going off and doing it. Now this is used in a combination of the technologies. It could be PowerShell, it could be native PowerShell, so just the normal scripts that you have now on-premise for doing tasks that we just put up into the Azure Automation Service and then we execute them. Or it could be PowerShell Workflow, which is a slight derivative of PowerShell, brings in a lot of parallelism, not that I can say the word today, which allows you to do multiple tasks at the same time. So take that idea of, well actually fine, I want to go out and change a registry key on 200 desktops at the same time. Rather than doing it, change one desktop, then connect to the next, and then to the next, we can just go blat and go and change them 200 devices at the same time. Brings in a lot of speed and enhancements. And for those of you that are still learning PowerShell, and if you are still learning PowerShell, you really, really need to speed up. It's one of them things that you've probably heard a few people say, that it's either learn PowerShell or go work in McDonald's. It is the scripting language of choice now. It is the tool that has been used to do a lot of heavy lifting in the automation and the removal of manual repetitive tasks. If you are still learning it, we do have the option of graphical workflows within PowerShell. So this gives you that ability to actually drag and drop objects, structure them into a workflow process, take the information backwards and forwards between different activities and actually plan out in a visual manner how you're going to perform that automation task. Now I mentioned this thing about a hybrid worker. So that's about the only on-premise infrastructure that you would need if you want to interact with your local on-site infrastructure. There is no more need to have some sort of, well, in terms of what this was before when it was on-premise, which was a service management automation server or runbook servers from the orchestrator days. We don't need to have lots of scaled out infrastructure for running and interacting and managing them and SQL databases. It's a cloud hosted service. So all your configuration lives up in the cloud, and we just choose when or how we want to invoke these runbooks to go and perform and actually action the different tasks. And there's a flip side to this as well, in terms of a new component that's coming in called desired state configuration. I say new, it's been around for a while now. It's slowly starting to gain more and more traction in terms of what it can do. And what is DSC in a nutshell? Well, rather than a script, which you have to put assumptions in there, you have to do checks, you have to make decisions and branches to do this depending on that, and it could error out, and it's only going to run once. DSC is actually a imperative configuration that we actually say, I want this device to be like this. Go make it so. The DSC engines, and this is built into Windows Server and specifically Windows 10, etc., where you have the DSC as part of the PowerShell engine. So it will go and take that configuration, it will apply it to a device, but it will check its compliancy. If it sees something is already in that state, it'll leave it alone. If it's not, it will reapply that configuration and bring it back to that baseline state as you've told it should be. So this is starting to think about designing your configuration, or even on the server side, your infrastructure as code. Architect it, plan it, write it, design it, deploy it. No more little tweaks here and there. You make sure you have your baseline, and that's what the systems will end up like. It's this concept of people do go in and make ad hoc changes. If it's not very structured and controlled through change control, you're not mandating that says, right, well, we must record when that's done, how it's been done, if you're just doing a quick tweak on the fly, or if you go to a system and say somebody goes, well, actually, I don't want the TFTP service running anymore. It's not needed, security aspect, stop it. DSC, if you define, well, actually, that TFTP service is needed for something, it's part of the system, we don't want to bring that system down by turning it off. If somebody does go and actually turn that service off, DSC will say, actually, no, that needs to be on, turn it back on again. So it's that idea in terms of if a minion goes and breaks the system, DSC should be able to revert it back to a known, working, defined, configured state. So how can you guys utilize this type of methodology, or what can PowerON do to actually enable some of this? So taking that whole concept of being able to design out what something should look like, how a service should be designed, configured, deployed, then we can actually start to look at automating some of them difficult tasks that some of you may face. And then you don't have to. It's the same idea as if you came to us as a consultancy firm and said, I would like you to come and do this. We can design it and then apply it. There's no need for you to invest in internal resources to learn and deploy the solutions that we already know how to do. And it's using the power of the cloud to be able to actually deliver a solid installation or solid deployment and configuration of a solution with minimal effort on your part in a rapid fashion. So I'd like to take a second just to introduce something that we're starting to call Camino. So this is something that we've been working on for a little while, and it'll be coming out very shortly. So this is going to be using some of these technologies to introduce the idea of being able to deliver an automated deployment of some of the Microsoft technologies. So we're going to start around things like Configuration Manager, moving through the Microsoft System Center stack, so Service Manager, Orchestrator, and Operations Manager, etc. We'll be looking at a web portal driven delivery. So the idea, you can go to a landing page, you can start to put in some information that it prompts you, start to gather information around how large, how many desktops you have, how many servers, what your network links look like, how many data centers, so the topology of your infrastructure, what your goals and your aims are, so we can actually provide you back some sizing recommendations. Say, actually, based on our knowledge, we've done it enough times, this is the type of deployment that you're looking at. And as we go through that, we can make recommendations. Says, well, actually, you might want to decide that having distribution points all over here, lowering your bandwidth costs because we've got 20 servers over there on the end of a 56K dial-up modem. Bit of an extreme example, but you get the idea. But being able to actually take that information and then be able to apply configuration to your servers. So if we said, fine, you're looking at a main primary site and maybe a couple of distribution points within your data center, when them servers are there, put that information into the portal in terms of that's the server that's going to be that role and that role. And then DSC and the whole Azure automation can take over and then configure them servers and the systems. So doing that initial deployment method, giving you the ability to see what stage it's at, how it's going, until at the end, we can then start to do the customization layer. So this is not just a deployment technology. So this is that case of, think of it almost as having a clone consultant in your pocket. We've done this many, many times. And one of the biggest failings of doing things repetitively in a manual fashion that somebody does it over and over when they've done it, is that ability to maybe miss a setting, untick a box that they should have had ticked normally just because they forgot. They might have had a late night, so they didn't actually remember to do it in the morning. So we're removing that human error element and actually making sure that it's a consistently done process that is always looked at, checked for consistency, and reapplied if it's out of variance. And then we actually do some of that things that we do as many times as a consultant. We know the best practices. We say, well, actually, fine, really, we ought to have this optimization script on this database. You have this many split files. All of that can be applied, and common applications, configurations, task sequences, all the bits that we'd normally put in that takes a lot of time afterwards. And it's that time aspect as well. Not only do you gain that bit of control over being able to specify what it is you want, capture the information, see what's going on within the deployment aspects, but you're also getting very quick delivery mechanisms. So your project life cycles are dramatically reduced from possibly months, 6 months, years, depending on how many components you're trying to install, to literally as fast as you can type stuff into a portal. So I've got a very quick demonstration of something that the initial install that we were looking at actually doing, and then I'll show you an example of a built one. So it's not something that I'm going to kick off now and just let run for however long, because otherwise you would be waiting here for a good few hours as it installs SQL, etc. Now, one of the things that I did was also just look at the initial setup side of it and what it would look. So it's not the portal today, unfortunately. We're still in the development phase of that. I don't want to show a half-done finished one, but I'll show you the actual manual side if it wasn't a delivered one in terms of kicking off the initial install bit. So at the minute it's a very simple MSI installation. We expect that customers will have gone through the portal and they will be given a customer subscription ID. So that's what we type in. So this one is just our test one. So I basically type in test 0001. There's a workspace ID that we'll also have issued out. I'm not going to give you all my workspace ID in my test environment. And then we have the hybrid worker group. So all this is basically doing at the minute is basically onboarding one server that is going to be a delivery point out into the automation system, so Azure Automation. So that runs through, basically configures the server, and it's ready. That's about as much effort at the minute as is required. And we're looking to streamline this even more. Now, obviously that's now configured. If we go to the Azure Automation portal, so this is our registered one, we can see that's now been added. So that is our test hybrid worker group. So we can now see that server that is on-premise from the cloud side. We have it registered as a DSC node, which then basically allows us to apply your chosen configuration into the system. So we'll get rid of that. There we go. Now, one question that a lot of people did have was around how secure this is. So everything that deals with Microsoft Azure Automation is encrypted. So all the communications done over 443, SSL normal encryption. Delivery of configuration files are encrypted at rest, both up in Azure, so in terms of passwords, things like that, and locally on the actual endpoint nodes themselves as well. So we basically register that one endpoint node, and then we can then branch out to the other servers that you've specified and configure them ready for the solution that you've chosen, depending on the information that you've supplied. So one thing I wanted to show very quickly was around what something like this looks like after deployment. So this is one of the servers that we deployed recently. So this is basically the configuration manager, and it's on our current branch environment. And as you can see, it's a standard install. We have configuration manager up and running, but then we have a lot of the things that would normally get done afterwards. So for example, we have the applications. It's already pre-built a lot of the common applications that people require and need to be able to actually start doing things like OS deployment. When you build an OS environment, you're generally going to have things like the Visual C++ runtimes installed. There they are, things like Adobe Java, management frameworks, so they're ready to use immediately after the deployment. So this was that custom configuration that we were talking about. Right down to things like some of the operating systems that are already in there. So we have a lot of things around task sequences, the operating system images, so fully patched, configured operating system images ready to utilize, so we can start doing operating system deployment immediately. Right through to some of the common drivers for things like the Surface devices, and then with all the configuration done in terms of the boundaries. My mouse is slightly out of sync, unfortunately. Boundaries are in there, common collections are in there, so we build on some of the stuff that we get asked to do every time. Things like collections for Exchange servers, the different operating systems. That's not going to let me click on there. Here we go. OSD cycles for bringing in patch management if you're not aware of it. Oops, patch management if I click on that one even. So a lot of these things that would normally be configured after the fact, so you've got to wait, you have to get through the design phases, you have to get through the actual deployment phases, and then someone sits there manually building a lot of this information. So Camino is designed to rapidly accelerate your projects. Bring in a modern management system as well for your desktops, so moving to things like configuration managers, bringing in the systems and the tools you need to be able to then go and actually deliver business value back to your end users. I hope that made sense, and we'll move on to the next session shortly. Thank you very much.